Hello, I'm Faith Moore, host of the Storytime for Grown-Ups podcast and author of the novel Christmas Carol. That's Carol with a K. Over on my podcast, we're reading Charles Dickens's novella, A Christmas Carol, for the month of December. There's a link in the description of this video if you'd like to check that out. My novel, Christmas Carol, is a modern retelling of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, in which the Scrooge character has been reimagined as a workaholic mom named Karol, whose miserliness is not about her money, but her time, and how much time she chooses to spend, or not spend, with her family. To go along with each chapter of Dickens's book, which I'll be reading on my podcast in twice-weekly episodes, I'll be posting a reading of a corresponding section from my own book here on YouTube. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to the book's Amazon page. It's a cozy Christmas read and would make an excellent gift. If you buy a copy, email me a screenshot of your receipt and I'll enter you into a drawing to receive either your money back, making the book free, or an additional signed copy. The email to send that to is in the description of this video as well. And anyone who buys a copy and emails me their receipt is entitled to a free signed book plate, which I would mail to you at no charge. It's a sticker with my signature on it, personalized to you or whoever you're gifting the book to, that you put in the book to turn it into a signed copy. Just let me know in the email who to make the book plate out to and what address to mail it to. Today's episode of Storytime for Grown-Ups was an introductory episode where I gave some historical context and some background information about A Christmas Carol and Charles Dickens. You can find a link to that episode in the description of this video. So, for today's reading from my book, Christmas Carol, I'll be reading a passage from the beginning of the book. It's the start of chapter 2. Karol, who is a lawyer, has decided that she has to go into the office to take care of a very important work issue on Christmas Eve. Really, she's just trying to get away from the Christmas festivities at home, like baking cookies with her kids and going to her daughter's Christmas Eve concert at church. Karol hates Christmas. Eventually, we'll find out why. But for now, we join Karol as she stands outside her husband Beau's home office door, gearing up to tell him that she's going into the office. Chapter 2. Karol stood in the hall outside Beau's studio. Choral music filtered softly from under the door, something in Latin. There he was again, in her mind's eye, running a paint-splattered hand through his chestnut hair, leaving a smudge of white across his forehead. The music swelled, and she imagined him leaning back in his chair, closing his eyes. "Just listen to it, Karol," she imagined him saying. It's like they're trying to paint heaven with their voices." She shook her head. He was always saying ridiculous things like that. What did it even mean? Her heart constricted. She tucked her own hair, now brushed to a glossy shine, behind her ear, pressed her red lipsticked lips together, straightened the sleeve of her Armani suit. She was gearing up for a fight. She could already picture the look of disappointment on Beau's face when he saw she was dressed for the office. That guarded, distant look he got, like a curtain falling between them. She imagined him pushing himself away from his easel, brushing past her to go downstairs and take over with the kids. She was suddenly irritated. She had to go into the office. A major client was unhappy. It was the right thing to do. The argument, so familiar, never resolved, began to play itself out in her mind. It was because she did things like this that they could live the life they lived. The house, the school, the vacations, the summer camps and toys. This commitment to her clients was what made her law firm so in demand. No one ever seemed to understand that. "Is the house on fire?" Beau's voice came to her through the door, soft, the hint of a smile. "Because I'm pretty sure I expressly said that you could come and get me only if the house was on fire, and I don't smell smoke, so—" "Beau, it's me." A pause. "Oh." His voice went flat, not even a hint now of a smile. "Come in." She opened the door. This room was so different from the rest of the house. Cluttered, mismatched, homier. It smelled of paint and coffee, and something like cinnamon and cloves, a smell Karol had always associated with Beau. When they'd moved here, to Brooklyn, when Carol's team of decorators had descended on the brownstone with white rugs, bright chandeliers, and stainless steel, Beau had insisted that he keep this space the way he wanted it. He'd lugged the tattered, overstuffed armchair from their very first apartment up the stairs himself and put it, just right, in the corner by the dormer window. He'd spent a Saturday laying beige carpet over the original hardwood floors, an act one of the decorators had called a crime against God and all that is holy. Not to mention totally impractical for an artist. There were smudges and paint splatters all over it now. They'd fought about it, but Beau had won in the end. Carol's Manolos sunk into the horrible carpet as she stepped into the room. A choir was singing softly from a Bluetooth speaker on Beau's workbench. In the time it had taken for her to open the door, Beau had turned his easel toward the wall so she couldn't see what he'd been working on. That hurt her in a place she didn't acknowledge. He was sitting on his wooden swivel stool in the corner across from the window, a shaft of morning sunlight creeping toward him up the wall. He had his thumb hooked into his palette, a brush tucked behind his ear. The workbench beside him was littered with brushes and flattened tubes of paint. A newspaper was thrown haphazardly on the armchair. Beau swiveled his stool around to look at her. There were strands of gray in his hair, little lines around his mouth and eyes. A tired, sort of defeated look about him that Karol found annoying. But he was still handsome, still tall and sinewy and lithe. He put his palette down on the workbench beside him, perched his gold wire-rimmed glasses up on top of his head, and rubbed his eyes like he was exhausted. "Karol," he said. He said it softly, gently, but she heard it like a barb. "It's Christmas Eve." Anger, primed and ready, unfurled in her stomach and took off through her bloodstream. She crossed her arms, lifted her chin. "Yes, Beau, I'm aware of that. But something important has come up and I have to go in." What could be so important that... You know what? Never mind. Beau took the paintbrush from behind his ear and tossed it down on the workbench. "Nothing's that important. You just want to be at work." A flare of indignation shot off in her stomach, and her face went instantly hot. "That's ridiculous, Beau, and totally unfair. You know why I do all this." She fell effortlessly into the script they followed every time. "I really don't, Karol. I can't figure it out." He fell into the script too, speaking in that quiet, detached-sounding voice that always irritated her. "It's not like we need the money. My paintings are selling. If you scaled back, nothing would really change. You could work part-time even. We've been through all this." He looked up at the ceiling and sighed. "You're calling people in, aren't you? Roberta and whichever lawyers are unlucky enough to be assigned to whatever case you think needs to be worked on right this minute. Making them come in on Christmas Eve. It's insane, Karol. Cruel, even. That's enough." She could feel her hands shaking, heat rising in her cheeks and spreading down her neck. "You may not see it, but I'm doing this for us. Marley taught me to never get complacent, and she was right." Beau closed his eyes. Marley Jacobs was a bitter little woman who used work to cover up for the fact that she had no life. White, hot rage bubbled up in Karol's chest. "Don't talk about Marley like that," she snapped. "Especially..." She faltered. "Especially not right now." She thought she saw Beau's face soften, but she didn't give him a chance to speak. "The kids are downstairs. Take care of them. I'm going out." "Weren't you supposed to make cookies with them this morning?" Karol shrugged, her body thrumming with anger. "We started, but I'm sure you can finish with them. You're good at stuff like that. I'm a bad mother, remember?" She turned to go. She had to leave, now, before she actually started screaming at Beau. "Did it ever occur to you that it's not really about the cookies?" She closed her eyes and let her breath out through her nose. She had to get out of here. Getting into a screaming match was just going to delay things. Also, it would only be her screaming. That was one of the most frustrating things about Beau. He always stayed calm. She turned back around. Beau was standing now. His jeans had streaks of white paint on the knees. He was reaching for his brown collared cardigan hanging on a hook on the wall. He shoved his arms into the sleeves. She noticed, fleetingly, that his socks had little Santa heads on them. "It's not about the cookies, Karol," he said. He took his glasses off his head and put them back on, looking at her. There was a sudden intensity in his eyes. She looked away. "Do you know how many batches of cookies I've made with them since Thanksgiving?" She opened her mouth to speak, but he spoke over her. "They wanted to make cookies with you. Heck, they would have watched paint dry if it had been with you. If you just stayed still long enough to—" "I can't do this right now, Bo," Karol said. She turned back to the door. "And that's not true. They'd much rather do this stuff with you. So what's the point of me—" She breathed in quickly, her throat suddenly tight. You know how I feel about this Christmas stuff," she said, recovering. "And this thing at work is going to get ugly if I don't deal with it now. It'll be fine. I'll make it up to them. I'll be back for dinner. There'll be time to do something else with them if they still want." She walked out of the room and into the hall. Downstairs, one of the children was crying. Great heaving, hiccuping sobs. "For goodness sake," she muttered under her breath. Bo came up behind her, startling her. He put a hand on her shoulder and she went still. "Stay," he said softly. Some of the anger went out of her. His touch could still do that to her sometimes. "I can't," she said. "Really, Bo. This is important." She turned to face him. "I'll be back soon. As soon as I can." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he just dropped his hand, stepped past her, padded down the hallway in his ridiculous socks. At the stairs, he turned around. "You remember that Annabelle's singing at church this evening?" She hadn't remembered. "Of course I remember. But you remember that I don't do church, right?" "She's singing, Karol. I'll come to the next one." "Will you?" She sighed. "She doesn't want me to come, Bo. She told me so." "Karol, that's ridiculous." "It's not. Whatever. I'll see if I'm done in time." She wouldn't be done in time. "Did you see the card from Fran?" The anger surged in her again. She clenched her teeth. "How many times do I have to tell you, Bo, I don't want anything to do with her?" She couldn't stop her voice from rising. Downstairs, the crying paused, then started up again even louder. "I'm coming," Bo called down the stairs. Then he turned back to Karol. "It was a birth announcement," Bo said. "Fran had a baby, a little girl. You're an aunt, Karol." He didn't wait for an answer. He thundered down the stairs, calling out to the kids. "Who wants to make cookies?" She stood in the hallway, fighting a sudden incomprehensible rush of tears. She blinked them away and shook her head sharply. She smoothed down her crisp white shirt. Fran could have 1,000,000 babies for all she cared. She wanted nothing to do with any of them. She strode down the hall, grabbed her purse from where she'd left it at the top of the stairs, and plunged her hand in to yank out her phone. She pulled up the Uber app as she went down the stairs. The crying had stopped. Without looking up, she grabbed her coat from the hook by the door. She didn't pause to say goodbye.